So I saw 28 Years Later on opening weekend, and boy, do I have some thoughts on this one. Some good, some bad, some I'm still undecided on. I'm going to explore what went right about the film and what went wrong and who's to blame for that. Hint, hint. 28 Years Later was probably my most anticipated film of 2025 coming into it, so I had a lot of expectation on it, more than other films I've seen this year. 28 Years Later is the third film in the franchise, the first one coming out in 2002. This film reunites director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland, the writer and director respectively of the first film. The sequel, 28 Weeks Later, came out in 2007, but it didn't involve Danny Boyle or Alex Garland. It was a whole new creative team. Needless to say, it wasn't a bad film, but it didn't live up to the hype and success of the original 28 Days Later. Danny Boyle and Alex Garland would go on to work on another film together called Sunshine that came out in 2007. Although it's a fine film, it kind of flopped commercially. And even looking back, Alex Garland and Danny Boyle would agree that they had creative differences about the ending of the film. And if you've seen that film, you could see why. It was pretty jarring to the whole feel of the film. Most of the first 2/3 of it is kind of like a sci-fi space exploration film, and then the last third turns into a straight-up horror movie. So they hadn't worked together since Sunshine in 2007, as Alex Garland would go into directing. He directed a couple films, Ex Machina, Annihilation, Civil War, Warfare recently that came out, and he's established himself as a writer-director. And Danny Boyle, of course, went on with his career and won Oscars for Slumdog Millionaire and everything. And during the separation, both of them would get questions from fans asking if either of them would ever return to another 28 Days project again for the third film in the series. And they, after all these years, kept getting questions and questions that they decided that they would Garland would take a crack at writing again. And so Alex Garland pumped out a script that him and Danny Boyle both agreed on, and then the film got a green light, and that's where we are today. It's also announced that 28 Years Later will be the first in a trilogy of films, 28 Years Later trilogy films. The second one will be coming out next year, directed by Nia DaCosta and also written by Alex Garland. So after all the years apart, the film has finally been released. And how was it, you might ask? Well, the answer to that's complicated, so let's just get right into it. So firstly, I'm just going to go through the plot just so we can kind of delve into it a little deep. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen the film. Spoiler alert if you have not seen the film. Okay, here we go. 28 Years Later opens up on a scene during the original outbreak of the virus in the UK in 2002. A group of kids are watching Teletubbies on the TV when suddenly a group of zombies breaks into the house and all hell breaks loose. One kid named Jimmy manages to get away and run towards the safety of a church. There's a priest there praying in the middle of the church, and Jimmy calls him Father. Now, it's not said overtly if he's just calling him Father because he's the priest or if it's his father. But according to IMDb, that character playing him, it says Jimmy's father. So I'm going to assume that that's his actual dad. Anyways, the zombies break through. Jimmy's able to hide while the priest accepts his fate to become another infected. Then next we jump forward 28 years later, after the virus, to a small community that has been able to survive the virus on this small island off the coast of the UK. We see through masterfully done sequence of exposition how the community functions. Everyone has a job: farmer, fisherman, seamstress, watchman, etc. Obviously there's no modern day technology, so the survivors have had to adapt and revert back in time to older ways of life. But for all intents and purposes, this is a functioning community of people in a post-apocalyptic scenario. This is where we meet Jamie, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, and his son Spike. Now at first I obviously thought that Jamie was the little kid, Jimmy, from the beginning scene of the movie, and this is him 28 years later, but we'll see later on that that's not how it is. But anyway, we then see Spike's mom, Isla, has an unknown sickness and is bedridden. Jamie and Spike then set out on an important journey. It's Spike's first time leaving the guarded gates of this island community and set foot on the mainland, which is crawling with infected. So it's sort of a rite of passage to manhood for all boys of the settlement, and this is Spike's turn. Both of them are equipped with only bows and arrows, and they set foot for the mainland. As expected, Jamie and Spike soon run into trouble and barely make it to the attic of an old house to wait it out for the night. Here Spike sees in the distance a burning fire indicating that there may be some other human settlements on the mainland. We also discover, as audience members, that the infected have evolved since the last films. They've learned to hunt in packs, and the packs are led by alphas. They're bigger, stronger infected that seem that they're able to give orders to other regular infected. When morning comes, Jamie and Spike hightail it out of there to the land bridge to get back to the safety of their island, only to be tracked down by one of these alphas and chased in a really tense sequence all the way across this land bridge back to the island. And the alpha is brought down just in the nick of time, right before they get to the gate. So Spike is then greeted with a celebration of everyone on the island for his coming home party. Here his dad tells Spike's heroic tales and endeavors to all the townsfolk, although much of what he's saying is embellished. Later on, Spike sees his dad run off and cheat on his mom with another woman. This changes how he sees his father from this point on. Now, the first third of this movie, to me, was by far the best part. The encounters with the infected in the beginning, the bow and arrow kills. To me, that was the most tense and thrilling part of the movie. It's also aided by the performances. Aaron Taylor Johnson and Alfie Williams, the father-son dynamic of these two characters, is at the center of this first act of the film. The competent Jamie, having true belief in his son's abilities, is trying to teach him how to survive in this hostile world. And it makes for a really authentic portrayal of teaching moments for young Spike when he's in these dangerous circumstances. Spike has to learn important lessons, tough lessons on this mission to the mainland from his father and the brutal realities about this world that they're in. I thought that this was the strongest core of the film, and I wish it had stayed that way throughout the film, but unfortunately it didn't, as we'll talk about. The morning after Spike's return, he confronts his father about him being unfaithful to his mom and questioning his loyalty to their family. Spike then asks one of the older villagers about the fire that he saw on the mainland, and that's when this older gentleman tells him that that's probably from a man named Dr. Kelson, who was a practicing doctor before the virus, but he's managed to survive all on his own on the mainland somehow. Then Spike goes to ask his dad about Dr. Kelson, and earlier Jamie, he knew what the fire was, but he didn't want to tell Spike. But now he tells him that once, when he was much younger, he was on the mainland and witnessed Dr. Kelson with a field of corpses, and then he was burning all the corpses, and so he just figured he was a crazy person. But Spike, now that he knows this guy was a doctor before the infection, he believes he might have the ability to cure his mom's illness. So he decides he takes his mom and sets off for the mainland. So Spike's plan to do this, because it's kind of a lockdown place on an island, he intentionally starts a fire, and then goes to the guard tower, and then tells him that there's a fire and we need everyone on the island to help. Now, to me, it seemed a little unrealistic, unbelievable that the guard guy, the most important job on the island, would leave his post under any circumstances. It's like, did they not have enough other people that could go and help? You're telling me that one guy that's charged with the safety of the whole island leaves his post because there's apparently a fire going on and he has to help. Anyway, that lets Spike and Isla slip through the front gate and onto the mainland with no one noticing. From there, Spike and Isla go in on the mainland a little bit and then decide to spend the night in this old abandoned church. Spike is supposed to be watching, but then falls asleep, and then one of these big fat zombies that only crawl on the ground is able to sneak up on him, and there's this weird dream sequence. But anyway, his mom, who up to this point, his mom has been out of it. She's there's something wrong with her. She doesn't even know where she is half the time. Is able to muster up the strength to bash this giant fat zombie's head into some stone right on top of Spike, and then he just sleeps through it. He must be a deep sleeper, apparently. He didn't hear anything. So then we jump to another scene where there's a group of soldiers on the mainland, and they're being hunted down by a group of infected. We see them going into a tunnel, and then they start to get picked off one by one. There's a big fight. They try and shoot them, but only one of the soldiers manages to get away. And then we also see another small scene where there's a group of infected on a creek bed, and then one of them's a female infected, and she's pregnant. Yeah, so This is the other big issue I had with the movie that was just a stupid concept. A stupid concept. Now I get it. They're trying to like portray that at this point the infected have become like a force of nature. They're just like another part of Mother Nature. They're going to try and grow. They're going to try and reproduce, right? So that's like the thinking of it. But we'll get into later why it kind of doesn't make any sense. So then, of course, Spike and Isla, they're walking around and they start to get chased by another group of infected, and they're forced to take shelter in this old abandoned gas station. So they're able to get in, and then the infected follow them in. And then at the last second, the one soldier from earlier that I talked about that got away is on the roof of this gas station somehow. I guess he was just hiding it out. And then he saves their asses and throws a grenade in. Oh, in the gas station's filled with like gas in the air. You could like see it. And that didn't make sense to me either. It's like 28 years after everything went to hell. It was from the initial. I mean, it could have been years after, but 28 years later, you tell me that gas has just been lingering around in this gas station. It didn't dissipate into the air. The wind didn't blow it out. It's like, okay, whatever. But the grenade goes off, catches all the gas on fire, but it kills all the infected. But miraculously, Spike and Isla they're safe. They just walk out. It's like, yeah, that was a little bit ridiculous to me. A little bit of suspension of disbelief on that one. Kind of didn't make sense. So anyway, they meet with this soldier. He's from Sweden, and they continue with the soldier as a group of three who turns out his whole crew was a patrol boat patrolling the coast of the UK, and they got shipwrecked, and then they had no choice but to go on the mainland to try and survive it out. Now, kind of like what I was saying earlier, this is another example of a contrived plot point of this film. This soldier only exists so he can have a conversation with Spike that's a couple scenes later about how different the world is outside the UK. And he shows him things that Spike knows nothing about. He shows him his smartphone. He even shows him his like Instagram model looking girlfriend who's Spike. There's a little joke played off about that. He's like, oh, she looks like she's allergic to shellfish. She's blown up or whatever. So, but I mean, that was a good dialogue scene there. That was like the one part of the movie where the whole theater was kind of laughing. But if you really think about it, it's like, what was the point of this soldier being in the story? Just so they could have this little conversation about, oh, how much the world has changed. And then, yeah, we'll see why the soldier, he's even more relevant here in a second. So then keep in mind that they have this conversation in the middle of a field, like they're literally having a picnic when there could be infected anywhere, like in broad daylight. But the infected only come around when it's convenient for the plot. So anyway, then the three of them start trekking along again, and Isla, who isn't even aware where the hell she is, what's going on. For some reason, they have her leading the group, and she's in front of them so far that they can't even catch up. And then she starts to head for this abandoned train. And apparently she's so far and so fast that they let her get away into the train without being able to stop her. And what is inside the train? The most ridiculous part of this film. There is probably the same pregnant zombie infected, sitting there giving birth in this train. Yeah. So this bloodthirsty infected, rather than immediately attack the Spike and Isla and the soldiers walk up and they just sit there next to this infected, and Isla even holds hands with this female infected to help her push out the baby. You know, like she's a human, like wouldn't just bite them or attack them. They're able somehow to figure out that the baby isn't infected. How they know that? Don't know. Now, in theory, like that could be possible, that just because if a woman has a disease and she gives birth to a baby, that doesn't necessarily that disease will be passed on to the baby. You know, it just doesn't work that way. And they even kind of explain this later on, but it's just the absurdity of this situation that's so unrealistic. After these characters have been hunted and tracked down by infected everywhere they go, they've been chased, the soldier, his home team is killed, they see an infected giving pregnant, and their first instinct isn't to just kill her. Isla takes the baby, holds it, and then the infected predictably tries to attack them, and they're only saved because the soldier is the only one paying attention, has a quick reaction and shoots this infected. The soldier is then rightfully the only logical one in the solution. He demands that the baby be killed, or they leave it, or just get the heck out of there. But Isla and Spike demand that they take the baby with them. So, of course, and then another stupid contrived plot point here, the soldier, he's trying to back away from the what he thinks is an infected baby to the one part of the train where there's a hole in the ceiling, and then when the alpha's infected, swoops down and picks him up and literally rips his head and spine out of his body. So there you go. That the soldier that was put in the story just to play off jokes is just immediately discarded and literally beheaded right there, just like that. Anyway, so then Spike and Isola make a run for it with the baby, and just when they're about to get caught, it's none other than Dr. Kelson, who they've been looking for, shows up, saves the day, and hits this giant alpha infected with a dart with like a drug concoction, and it kind of subdues him. Oh, and another thing about the alpha, this is the other ridiculous part. There is so much, excuse my language, zombie dick in this movie. And it's like hilariously huge. Like it had to be prosthetic. They go out of their way to show this giant alpha infected's dick just swinging right in front of frame as he's running around chasing them. It's just hilarious and kind of unnecessary. But now that they meet Dr. Kelson, he goes on to say that, I know this alpha, actually. I named him Samson. I know all the zombies. I give them all names. Now, this goes in the third act of the film, which I liked even less, the part with Dr. Kelson. So up to the point, the big mystery of the film was Dr. Kelson. Who is this guy? Is he crazy? Is he some kind of mystical figure? How's he been able to survive by himself on the mainland all this time while piling up all these corpses and burning them? Why is he doing that? What are his aims? And you would think that he's some super genius lone wolf type character, able to overcome the looming threats of infected just through his sheer ingenuity and brutality. He's some kind of badass, some kind of rogue force, able to overcome all these forces of nature, right? But it's revealed that he's a lot more lamer than it seemed that he would be. So it's inferred that Dr. Kelson has been able to survive this whole time, not by sheer force, but by learning to peacefully coexist with them and see them as, and use his ability, can concoct these drug potions and use his dart gun to subdue them like he did with Samson rather than killing them. And you would think that someone that knows the risk of these infected would have the wherewithal to finish them off when he drugs them up. But no, he just literally leaves Samson, who's been trying to tear these people's heads off, and just leaves them in this field. They just go on. But anyway, of course, according to Dr. Kelson, Samson isn't really being a bad person or a bad being. He's just only after Spike, because after all, he took Samson's offspring. So it only makes sense for Samson to try and protect it. And this is why I have a problem with Garland's kind of pretentious writing style. Instead of just telling a straightforward and practical zombie horror movie like they did in 28 Days Later, he feels the need to have to subvert the genre at all costs. He has to do something different. And like partially I get it, like this zombie story has already been done before by him. So if he was going to return to it, he wanted to tackle it, he wanted to do it from a new way, a new perspective, with new ideas. I do have a problem with the ideas that he tries to push in this story. Frankly, they're just nonsensical to me. Like, love him or hate him, Alex Garland, the writer, he's more interested in the ideas in his movies rather than the characters or the plots or world building. Character and plot just seem to be devices for him to explore these grander ideas and communicate them through the art of cinema. But he always tries to do it from a moralistic point of view, in my opinion. This is no secret, this was his approach to 28 years later, as him and Boyle have discussed in recent interviews. But the problem is that he's trying to fit too many complex ideas into one movie. Like I said, this movie's kind of chopped into third parts, and it's trying to be 3 movies kind of put into one, and it just doesn't work. The first story being about the conflict of the father and the son coming of age. The second part toils around with the morality of a world filled with zombies and what human beings' relationship with the zombies would be in all practicality. And then the third part, which the film starts to go into at this point of the plot, is thoughts on death and how it shapes our reality and our psyche as we are mortal beings. So speaking of, let's get back to the story. So finally, after finding Dr. Kelson, Spike tells him about his mother's sickness and asks him if there's anything he can do about it. And then Kelson he does a few checks, feels her neck and whatever, no medical equipment. He's able to deduce that she probably has terminal brain cancer. And this is another thing about the movie. I'm no doctor, but watching it, her symptoms, she has nosebleeds, she can't remember anything, doesn't know where she is, physically weak. I was like, oh yeah, she probably has cancer, or maybe even brain cancer or something like that. And like, I was able to figure that out. So Spike risks his mom and his own life to track down this crazy doctor that he doesn't know, only for the doctor to be like, oh yeah, she's got brain cancer, she's probably gonna die. So it's like, yeah, I could have told you that. Someone else on the island probably could have told you that. She's sick. Gonna die. So, like I said, the plot happening just out of convenience to move the movie along so Alex Garland can get to these bigger philosophical ideas, which is what happens here. It seems like everything that happens in the film is inconsequential in the view of the audience, because this, like, for example, the soldier finding and saving them just for a few scenes to be killed, he's just a device to represent something in Garland's idea of what the film is trying to talk about. Jamie, in the beginning, Spike's dad, he's there to represent the flawed father figure with a sense of authority in Spike's life. And then he's abandoned the rest of the movie. And that's another problem I had with it. It's like, Jamie, he was like probably the most interesting character. And then they just don't ever go back to him. You don't see him after Spike leaves the island, except for one scene, which we'll get into later. So, and then Kelson shows Spike and Isla his big monument, this twisted bone temple. It's a monument made of literal human bones, presumably hundreds of dead, infected, or possibly not infected. Rows and rows of bones are piled into towers stretching high, leading to the central structure, which is a tower made entirely of human skulls. He goes on to say that he made this monument to represent the idea of memento mori. I would say remember this phrase, but you won't have to if you've seen this, because they say it like a million times. And the phrase means, remember you must die. This saying seems to be the basis of Kelson's worldview that's led him all these years through this infected outbreak. He uses the monument of bones to remind us that whether we're infected or not, we're all going to end up in the same place eventually, so therefore he doesn't differentiate between humans and infected. He just kind of sees the infected as people with an illness that need care, just like he saw patients with illnesses before the outbreak of the virus. So while Spike has kind of been indoctrinated with these ideas and thoughts on his island community, that the infected are the other. They are them, they are the enemy, they're this massive threat that looms large and it must be dealt with at every opportunity with extreme indifference, just like his father was telling him in their first venture out into the mainland. He's like, you need to kill more, and the more you kill, you won't even think about it. But Kelson provides the antithesis to this way of thinking in the film, seeing the infected as something that he can coexist with compassion and harmony, just as any other natural force, like any other animal. Basically, like, you know, we don't need to kill the infected that are trying to kill us. We need to learn to live with them, right? And you can kind of see the modern political viewpoint where that comes from and is trying to be shoehorned into this film by Garland. But I won't get into there. It's pretty clear what Garland's politics are from his writing. Anyway, the memento mori phrase is Kelson's way of remembrance to the past, something to hold on to that helps him cope with this darker side of the world now. This is the other central theme that Garland plays around with in the film. In times of trouble, often in our lives, we try and turn back to the past, to a perceived better time to help us get through the tough times. This is represented earlier in the film on the island. In the wake of everything that people knew and loved being torn away from them right when the virus hit, the survivors of the island that knew that time looked back on the past with more fondness, particularly through the British culture and history, because they're British. This is shown in a wonderful montage that juxtaposes the imagery of the islanders doing their bow and arrows with old British Laurence Olivier movies like Henry V, showing the English longbowmen in the field that was dealing death to their enemies during the medieval period. There's even a picture you can see of Queen Elizabeth in the gathering center that they have Spike's coming home party for. And presumably Queen Elizabeth is long gone at this point, and so is the British monarchy with everything else that they knew and loved about England. Yet the islanders still hang on to this memento of their past from their worldview in these circumstances. This is something that Garland talks about as being kind of the key, or one of the key themes of the film. How oftentimes people turned back to nostalgia when they felt that the times were better, when the country or community was in its golden era, and try and bring back those relics to the present time to bring back things that they are missing. But oftentimes people have selective memory and only seem to remember what was good about the past and never really about the downsides of that moment. And this is shown in another way near the close of the film, but we'll get to that in a second. All right, so back to the plot. Kelson then informs Spike and Isla that there's nothing he can do for Spike's mom, and her death is inevitable. Isla then decides that it's her time to go and agrees for Dr. Kelson to help her pass away on her terms in a peaceful manner rather than let her go on suffering. Kelson then drugs Spike and then gives Isla a drug concoction that helps her pass away peacefully. Kind of like how some people do euthanasia in modern days if they're suffering and want to go pass away in a peaceful manner. All this is done, mind you, without Spike being able to protest it. His mom's like, no, this is what I want, so, you have to go along with it. So he had no real say in it, but he just kind of had to accept it and watch Kelson hand him his mother's skull, which he was just talking to his mom a second ago, which is kind of fucked up. He then tells Spike to place it on the Tower of the Skulls. Now, I get the whole plot line is an allegory for the inevitability of death, and that if you really think about it, on the long enough time scale, we're all going to die, so I guess it doesn't really matter how or when it happens, just that it happens at a point, a high point. If you know someone is inevitably going to die, why not pick the place in how? So I kind of see what they're going for, and then it's not important when you die, but how you memorialize that person in their life and remember how they lived and how their lives affected us in a positive way. Now, I get the message he's trying to get here, and he has the right to explore this idea, but as an audience member, I'm also allowed to push back on it and not find it right and just find it not interesting. I didn't see the original 28 Days Later sequel. I didn't think it was such a good film because I was lectured on the philosophical viewpoints of death and our relationship with remembering the past and how that shapes our psyches. The original 28 Days Later didn't try to be pretentious and give the audience any grander ideas. Could it have done that? Yeah, it could have done that, but it didn't, and it was a better film than this film because of it. I'm not saying that you can't have grander philosophical ideas woven into a film or even a zombie film like this or any movie, but just because your film is trying to be deeper than the average zombie movie doesn't make it better. I think that's where the disconnect is for me on this one. So, all right, anyway, back to the story. God damn, this has been so long at this point. Okay, so Spike sets off, leaves Dr. Kelson after the death of his mother, and then he decides to go back to the island, but only to return the baby and then leave a note with the baby for his dad. Now, here's another annoying thing. I mean, this is another nitpicky thing, but how in the hell did he get this baby in this basket all the way up to the gate? At first, I thought he just like floated it across the water. And I was like, no, there's no way that happened. I'm like, okay, so he had to have waited for the tide to go down. And then did he just walk all the way across and no one saw him? Like the guards up in the watchtower didn't see someone walking. And then he just left this baby in a basket and then just hightailed out of there and no one knew? Like that didn't make any sense. And this is where we finally see Jamie. Like we don't know what the hell to this point he's been doing. They kind of forgot about him in the story. It was an odd choice not to show what was happening in the island, in my viewpoint, during all of this. I imagine the panic and worry everyone would have had on the community if two of their community members are missing, but we'll never know like what any of them were thinking. Earlier in the film, they make a point to say, no matter who goes on the mainland, no one is allowed to go after them. If you leave the gates and head to the mainland, you're on your own, no exceptions. But also what's been established about Jamie's character and just the kind of guy he is, I don't buy for a second that he would adhere to this rule, whether it's a rule or not, and let his son take his sick wife onto the mainland with all the dangers. Like, he would have done anything to get back to the mainland, find them if he had to sneak out, whatever he had to do. Why didn't he? Why was he shocked that he, stricken with shock, he couldn't do it? Was he searching for them on the island? Was he physically being held back from leaving the gates? We'll never know because they never show it in the film. Then we see Spike on his own in the mainland trying to survive. He's catching fish to eat. And then he starts to be chased by more infected, and he gets cornered here on this road. And then there's a strange group. This is the very end of the movie. Strange group of survivors, all dressed in these tracksuits, appear. And this scene of the film was oddly entertaining. Like, it revealed that the leader of this strange gang, his name is Jimmy. And turns out he's the same Jimmy that was the little boy from the opening of the film. We can tell that from he's wearing the same cross necklace that his father gave to him in that church all those years ago. So Jimmy and his gang hop in, and this crazy kung fu gruesome fight happens between this gang. They're doing these kung fu moves. They're tearing the affected apart in gruesome ways. And then Jimmy asks, "You want to join us?" And then Spike's like, "Yeah." And then that's it. That's the end of the movie. It was actually like so shocking. I actually kind of dug it. Like, it was the last thing I was expecting to see. So now there's some interesting theories going around about Jimmy and his gang. For one theory states that Jimmy dresses and looks like Jimmy Savile. So for those of you non-Brits like myself, don't know who Jimmy Savile is, he was a prominent TV personality and celebrity in the UK back in the day. He's one of the most well-known people in the UK, and nearly everyone would be able to recognize him if they saw him. But after his death, it was revealed that he was a prolific sexual predator. Really bad guy, turning him from one of the UK's most beloved figures to one of its most hated. But this is used as an allegory to the theme that we were discussing earlier about glamorizing the past. See, Jimmy is the same kid that was watching the Teletubbies at the beginning of the film. His generation was raised on television, the early 2000s, so presumably he was watching Jimmy Savile on TV also when he was a kid, like everyone else did. But in this timeline of the virus, it obviously hits, and then the truth about Jimmy Savile never comes out, like in our reality. So in young Jimmy's mind, Savile is still represented as a beloved memory from his past, from a better time. Other people also noticed how Jimmy's crew is all matching in these tracksuits, but all of them has their different color. Kind of like how the Teletubbies look that they were watching at the very beginning of the movie. There are other hints about Jimmy's presence shown earlier in the movie. The infected that Spike and Jamie find in this house hanging upside down, it's kind of hard to catch, but if you notice, it had Jimmy carved into its chest. So it's pretty sure him or his gang did this. And then there's also a sign that they pass. It's also another quick shot that says, "Behold Jimmy, he is coming with the clouds." It's possible that Jimmy is some sort of cult figure in this universe. And I believe that Jimmy represents another way of coping with this zombie apocalypse, where the islanders deal with it through isolating and idolizing historical Britain, and Dr. Kelson copes with it through acceptance and memorializing death and living at one with the infected. My theory is Jimmy copes with it through revenge, inflicting pain and getting back at the infected for inflicting pain on him as a kid. Now remember, all of Jimmy's friends and family that he was in that room with in the beginning of the movie died right in front of him as a kid. So this is a super traumatizing event that happened to him as a young child. He was still young when it happened, the infection hit, so his only memories he had were of a pre-infected world. So Jimmy might be struck in his state of prolonged adolescence in order to cope with this trauma. He's a grown man at this point, but he's still turning back to things in his childhood to get him going. So what is my verdict on 28 Years Later as a whole? Did Alex Garland really ruin it, like I said in the title? Well, as I said earlier, the movie is really 3 different movies kind of crammed into one. It's also the first in a planned trilogy, which will flesh out the story and themes and characters even more, I assume, so it is a little unfair for me to place judgment on this movie before the others come out without having seen them. But each movie in a series, no matter which, if it's a trilogy or whatever, each one has to be judged as a standalone piece, even if it's part of a multi-movie narrative arc. And my thoughts on 28 Years Later is that it had a lot of promise in the beginning, and then it lost its steam as the film went on. 28 years later collapsed upon the weight of its own ambition of trying to fit in too many grand ideas into one 2-hour movie. I thought the core of the movie should have been between Spike and his dad, Jamie, personally. And Spike taking lessons from his father, who's also kind of this flawed guy, but he's also learning to pass the torch to his son so he can be able to survive and become the man of the house, the man that he needs to be. Maybe that's where this story will lead in the sequels. We'll see. I was just upset that Jamie, he was such a good character. He was pretty deep, you know. He had these lovable qualities and he also had these kind of despisable qualities, and then they just kind of got rid of him through the whole second half of the movie. So that was a little disappointing. And then to touch on the themes, Garland, he's trying to portray the island as a symbol of repressive conservatism with a set core beliefs and values, and where every member of the community has their given role. And Spike's journey is about breaking out of this world, of this barrier. Literally and physically, the island is a barrier for him. And then he crosses the waters and he begins to make his own path into the world and find out who he is. It's portrayed that after Spike journeys with his dad, he starts to see the little lies about this community. He starts to see his dad lying and the cracks within the foundation of this island community, where he once believed its ideology faithfully, but that was before he had left the island and seen the rest of the world. The pastures of the mainland and where you couldn't see the sea. So he starts to question the island's intentions for its inhabitants. And this is really a retelling of one of mankind's oldest stories, The Prodigal Son, about a son who's raised in a strict repressive home, and then he decides to leave. He's going to leave his controlling father, his conservative household, and go and see what the world's all about. And then he does, and he goes and sees the ugliness of the world and how people really are. And then he returns home a wiser man for it, and his dad actually embraces him because it's like, oh, now you know what the world's really like. Now you appreciate your home a little more. So maybe that's where Spike's, where his arc will lead at the end of this trilogy. And so far as Alex Garland goes, as you saw in the title of this video, you know, I can give props to him for trying to be super ambitious, but just being ambitious alone, that doesn't add points onto how I grade a film as a whole. I like Alex Garland. Like, I like his movies. I think his writing is good, but sometimes it tries to be a little deeper than it really is. He's just obsessed with branching out on these deep philosophical themes in his films rather than just telling a compelling narrative. And how many times he ends up losing the plot, it's just too many for me. 28 Days Later worked all the way back in 2002 because it wasn't trying to outthink The Room. It took something that had been done before, zombie movies, that was a known genre, and it just switched it up and flipped it on its head. They were like, what if instead of slow zombies, they were really fast? They were sprinters. What if instead of the whole world experiencing an outbreak, it's only contained in the UK? You know, how would that affect the world and these characters? And that was good enough, and it didn't need any other sub-themes of morality or death or nostalgia, all these other things that are just fluff to the story. So I think Alex Garland just outthought The Room on 28 Years Later and made some mistakes, and this film could have been great in my opinion if it kept the tone of the first third of it, but it ended up being a little mediocre for my taste. So we'll see what happens with the next film and then the film after that, and then maybe it will redeem the sins that were made in the writing of this movie. So anyway, that is my thought. Let me know what you all thought about 28 Years Later.